Welcome to The Pivot, stories of people who made a change. My name is Andrew Osenga, and my guest today is Reverend Father James Martin. Father James Martin is one of the most well-known Jesuit priests in the world next to the Pope. Literally, if you Google him, it shows people also Google the Pope. It's crazy. He's the official chaplain of Stephen Colbert's The Colbert Nation. He's the author of a ton of books, two of which have just come out. One's called Learning to Pray, one a memoir about his jobs and the sort of work he's done that has formed him into who he is. It's called Work in Progress, and we're going to talk at length about both of those in this conversation. Jim, as his friends call him, is the editor-at-large at American Media, one of the biggest Catholic magazines in the world, and it was a huge honor to get to talk to him. Now, for years in the intro to my podcasts, I've done kind of a life and career update, letting you know about things going on with books, shows, music, whatever. I've decided I'm going to put that stuff after the interview so we can get right to the conversation. So we're going to do that, but I want you to know I have a lot to tell you. So please stick around after this amazing conversation because I do want you to hear what's going on. But for now, here is my conversation with Reverend Father James Martin. Father James Martin, it is so nice to meet you. And you popped up as Jim on here, which I've been, reading your work and seeing your name forever. And I was like, who's Jim? He goes by Jim. That's it.
That's fine,
I
Andrew.
love it. It's wonderful.
Thank you. And nice to meet you and someone with a nice biblical name too.
It was just St. Andrew's Day, and I go to an Anglican church, and our priest is Father Andrew, and we actually gathered all the Andrews in our church, and we had a St. Andrew's Day party, and it was hilarious. Yeah. There were eight.
How many were
There
you?
were 8 of us, and it was
I
wonderful.
always felt sort of sorry for Saint Andrew because, I mean, as your listeners know, it's Jesus calls Peter and Andrew and James and John first. And then at the Transfiguration, it's Peter and James and John. And I think, boy, Andrew must have been a little jealous. Don't you think so?
Yeah. And depending on the church calendar, sometimes we're the first of the year, sometimes we're the dead last. So,
And he's in heaven, so I'm sure everything's all
yeah,
forgiven,
it's
between him and Peter.
it's good. Yeah. Well, where are you today? Where you look like you're home.
No, I'm actually in my office at America Media, which is a
Okay.
Catholic magazine I've worked at for 25 years in New York City in Manhattan.
Okay.
And it is not to date us, but it is the day of the Christmas tree lighting at Rockefeller Center.
Oh my gosh.
This is the busiest night of the year in this neighborhood. I'm right on the same block, and so it is a zoo at about 4 o'clock tonight.
My goodness. Will you go out and watch it?
Absolutely not. It must be, it's tens of thousands of people. You can barely get out of the office building.
Oh my gosh. How far away do you live from there? Is it a good trick for you?
A block.
Wow. So you're in the
Yeah,
heart
so
of it.
I'm on so for those who know New York, I'm on 48th and 6th. Our office is on 48th and 6th Avenue. Rockefeller Center is like 50th.
Yeah.
And the tree is just down the street on 48th Street. It's literally a block away. So
Wild.
it is a zoo. It's just a zoo.
That is wild. But that's kind of magical. That's like all the Christmas movies. You're in the heart of it.
Well, and it's nice once it's lit. I go to see it. Of course, it's gorgeous, and it's this huge whatever, however many foot tree. It's gorgeous, and I go by as much as I can. But the night of the lighting is there. People want to stay away. In fact, some of the people in our office didn't want to come into work today because it's a zoo.
I bet.
Yeah.
That is wild. Well, man, I'm so excited to talk with you. Well, a lot of people know you as a priest. You've been doing this obviously for a long time, but this is not where you started. This is not the first even phase of your career. When you were a kid growing up, what did you imagine that your life was going to be?
I just wrote a memoir that's coming out in February called Work in Progress about this. I don't talk too much about this. I think when I was young, what I wanted to be was an architect. I know that sounds a little random, but I think I was watching too many Brady Bunch TV shows, and Mike Brady was an architect, and I loved the idea of just being in my split level house and designing
A house
houses
is
and
amazing.
churches
Yeah.
and buildings. So, but certainly not a priest. I didn't think I was going to be a priest.
Hmm. So you followed that dream, right? What did that look like for you?
The priest, not the architect
Well,
part.
okay, then did you end up going down the path of becoming a priest right away?
No, that's a great question. I studied business at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania as an undergrad. And so that was kind of my career path. And, when I was young, I wasn't super religious. I grew up in a Catholic family. My parents were, Catholics and Christians and whatnot, but not super religious. We went to mass most Sundays, not every Sunday. And we didn't really talk about God very much. And I didn't know really the first thing about the Bible other than what I heard, gospel stories read out at mass. And what happened was I was working in corporate America and I just thought, this just isn't for me. And I stumbled upon the writing of a Trappist monk called Thomas Merton. And his way of life and his devotion to God and his desire to help people and follow Jesus seemed a lot more appealing to me than business. And that's kind of how I got into the priesthood almost 40 years ago.
Wow. So what were you doing in business? Like what was that life like?
Yeah, good question. So I graduated from Wharton in 1982 with a degree in finance, and I took a job with General Electric in New York City, actually just a few blocks from where I am now. Uh, and I was in finance and accounting. I was in a financial training program in New York, and this is 1982, so I was a yuppie and going to all the bars and clubs and fill in the blanks. And then I took a job in human resources at GE Capital, which is their financial services arm, or at least was. And so, yeah, so I was in finance and then in HR for about 6 years before I joined the Jesuits.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like a pretty radical shift. Was it an overnight thing? Was it a gradual thing? Like, would you talk me through that season of your life?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, happy to. I think it was pretty, it was both overnight and gradual. I think I realized maybe about 4 or 5 years into working in the corporate world that while business is a real vocation for many people, and in fact, many of your listeners probably are in business in some form or
Yeah.
another, and that's a wonderful way to live out your life and contribute to the community and to the common good. It just wasn't for me. I just found it kind of dull and not interesting. And I remember thinking my roommates at the time loved it. And I loved reading Fortune magazine and the Wall Street Journal. And I thought, gee, how can you do that? It's so boring. And they're like, no, this is interesting. And I thought, okay, that's a bit of a sign that maybe I'm not in the right place. So I got more and more miserable, and the job got more and more stressful. And I thought, what am I going to do? I studied business. What am I supposed to do? I can't, try out for the Philadelphia Phillies or join the circus or an opera, or I had no clue what to do. I mean, there are things that are a little less extreme than that. And I came home one night and I turned on the TV and I saw a documentary about this Trappist monk, the guy that lives in a monastery. And it was just so beautiful. I thought that's a great way to live your life in service to God and with lots of prayer and helping people. And that really just captivated me. I read the book, thought about it for a couple of years, got more and more miserable at work, and was so stressed that I went to a psychologist. And one day the psychologist said, well, why are you working at GE if you don't like it? And I thought, well, what else would I do? And he said, well, you could do whatever you wanted to do. And I said, well, he said, what would you do if you could do anything you wanted to do? And I said, well, I'd be a Jesuit priest. And he said, why don't you? And I thought, yeah, why don't I? So that was the overnight part. But it was, it's like a fruit. It's, to use another gospel metaphor. I mean, it was the kairos. It was the right time. And I entered in 1988 and never looked back.
So did you go to seminary? Like what did you do then?
Yeah, it's a little, I know that most of your listeners are evangelical Christians, so it might be a little foreign. In the Catholic Church, there are what are called religious orders. So that would be the Franciscans, the Jesuits, the Benedictines. Pope Leo is an Augustinian, which is a smaller religious order. We live in community. We take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience in imitation of Jesus. And I think in the United States, um, Jesuits are probably best known for their schools, right? Georgetown, Boston College in the South, Spring Hill, Loyola New
Yeah, my daughter
Orleans,
goes to a
our high.
to a Jesuit school, St. Louis University. Yeah.
Uh, sure, there you go. Right, so that's what we're known for. But we do all sorts of other works too. running parishes, retreat houses, anything the church needs us to do. And so our training or formation is a little complicated. It's 2 years of novitiate, which is prayer and working with the poor. 2 years of what's called first studies, which is one of the programs is at St. Louis University, studying philosophy and theology. 3 years of what's called regency, which is working full time in a ministry. I worked with refugees. 3 or 4 years of theology, and then ordination. So it's a pretty long process before ordination. It took me about 11 years. Um, so yeah, so it's long. So and then ever since my ordination as a priest, I help out at parishes, of course, but I my main work is working at a Catholic magazine and
Yeah.
writing.
So you're not in like a daily, you're not like going to a church where you're working every day. You're working at a magazine. Yeah.
I'm working in a magazine with other Jesuit priests and lay people, of
Yeah.
course. And then on the weekends, I'm helping out at a parish,
Okay.
most weekends. Um, yeah, so again, it's a different way of being a
Yeah.
priest. Pope Leo was again an Augustinian. That's a smaller order. And Pope Francis was a Jesuit. It's very rare to have popes who are members of religious
Oh,
orders.
really?
Um, yeah, well, because they usually come up through the diocesan parish priest track,
Hmm.
right? Um, I'll tell you a funny story. One of my friends is a Jesuit priest, and he teaches history. He teaches church history, and he said he used to tell his class there were two things I know for sure about the papacy. One, there will never be a Jesuit pope. Two, there will never be an American pope. And he said, I don't mind being proven wrong, but proven wrong like twice in a row, that I don't like.
Yeah. I mentioned we have some friends in common who just recently met, the new Pope, and they're like, yeah, it was so wild to meet the Pope. And he was like, hey, yeah, I've been to Chicago, he just was an American
Amazing.
guy who was like, they just expected a guy who would speak in another language
Of
and it was
course.
just a guy who was an
I
American
know.
dude. Like, it was so wild. Yeah.
Well, and when we think about parallels to, I'm not comparing him to Jesus, but parallels to Jesus of, God's coming to us,
Yeah.
as a human being was probably something of the same shock, probably more of a shock.
Yeah.
Um, but I met with him. I knew him before he was elected slightly, and then I met with him just a
Yeah.
few months ago, and I remarked on that. I said to him, "It's very strange not to have to talk through a
Huh.
translator." And he said to me in English, "Yeah, a lot of people say that." you know. So I, he's just, yeah, it's great to have someone you can completely understand.
Yeah. Like, you could text with the Pope. That's just a bizarre thought, isn't it? Yeah. What would you
Good text with the
tell
Pope,
me
yes.
more about the Jesuits? Because it has been really fascinating and wonderful. I mentioned my daughter goes to this Jesuit school, and I've read a lot of Merton over the years, and I've also just been blown away by his writing. I think it's so beautiful and wonderful. But I've I'm not a Jesuit, and so being over there at the school with her the last few years, they've got this beautiful museum, and there's all these things I've been learning about it, and I've just found it really fascinating. Would you tell us what the Jesuit life is? Like, what is that? What does it mean?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a lot of Catholics don't even know it. And when Pope Francis was elected, people were like,
He
"What?
was
What
so
is this?"
radically different.
He was, and I think you get a sense of that, how different he was. Basically, what you need to know is the Jesuits are once again a religious order, which is, think of it as a community of priests and brothers. There are women's religious orders too. Sisters of Charity, Daughters of Charity, Sisters of Mercy. They live together in community. For them it will be a convent. For us, it's a Jesuit community. So that's the essential. We are Catholic priests and brothers. We do all sorts of different works. In the United States, again, we're known mainly for our education. We were founded by Saint Ignatius Loyola, who was a Spanish saint. We were founded in 1540, and he started us basically to. That's a great expression, to help souls. So very broad. It wasn't to start schools, or the joke is to start universities with great basketball teams like Georgetown and Gonzaga. But it was to help souls wherever we could. And it's a very open-minded way of looking at things. So we are not simply in parishes. We run schools, retreat centers. I work at a magazine. It's wherever we can help out the church and to help sort of the greater glory of God. Yeah, so it's a religious. It's different than, say, a parish priest or a diocesan priest who would be sort of focused on that locale.
Yeah.
So let's say if you're in Nashville, for example, there's the Diocese of Nashville, there's the Bishop of Nashville, there's probably a seminary he sends his guys to. When they're ordained, they are assigned to parishes in Nashville, and then they maybe move up through the system. Maybe they become a bishop, maybe a cardinal, but it's that kind of geographic focus. For the Jesuits, that's not the case. It's you could be sent all over the country and all over the world. So that's the difference. But geographic versus sort of maybe more international. But we're all priests and we're all brothers and sisters, and it's the same church. It's a little confusing to people. It gets even more confusing. I'll test your listeners' sort of patience. Sometimes the local bishop, say the Bishop of Nashville, will invite the Jesuits to take over a parish, right? Like we need someone to take over a parish. So let's say they might invite some Jesuits from St. Louis to staff the parish in Nashville. And then it gets very confusing. It's like, well, I thought you weren't parish priest. Well, we're not, but we're helping out in the parish. And so it's confusing even for Catholics. But what you need to know is we're a community of guys that live together in poverty, chastity, and obedience and try to help the church.
Yeah. Well, it's really beautiful, and all the artwork that seems to flow out of that community too is so rich and
Yeah.
sort of overwhelming. Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, early on, the Jesuits were, I think, one of the sort of foundations of the Baroque architecture movement. One of the things we try to do is preach the good news and preach the gospel, using any means. And if that means art or paintings or sculpture, that's part of our tradition as well.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'd love to go back to what you were talking about a little earlier with your early career shift. And I mentioned a lot of people find this podcast because something in their life is maybe shifting. Their career is hits a stale point, or a relationship hits a stale point. Um, in your work now with the magazine, and you talk to a lot of different people, and I know you see this all the time. The stats say that people are changing career every 5 or 6 years now, and what we're seeing
Sure.
with AI and just the global economy, and um, how do you think, uh, particularly in your work with prayer practices, which I'd love to get into, um,
Sure.
how do you think that these kind of more ancient prayer practices and different rhythms can help us as we are navigating these sorts of um, points in our lives where we have to deal with changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in the Jesuits, we have a whole tradition called discernment. And Pope Francis talked about this frequently. Pardon me. And it's the idea that God not only wants you to make good decisions, good and healthy and life-giving and faithful decisions, but that God will help you make those good decisions. And one of the ways that God helps you make these good decisions is by, inclining your heart or your soul in a certain way where you feel more at peace, or you feel a sense of hope, or you feel a sense of rightness. So let's take my own life as an example. I felt really uneasy and uncomfortable and unfulfilled and close to despairing in my job. And when I thought about leaving my work and joining the Jesuits, I felt this sense of hope and peace and comfort and excitement. And we Jesuits would say that in addition to looking at just the facts, I mean, like the fact that I'm not happy and the fact that I feel sort of stultified and the fact that I really am interested in this, the feelings are important too,
Yeah.
and that God is sort of moving our heart. And so, in our prayer to really pay attention to that. So it's not just head, it's heart too. And that's one of the ways that I think that Jesuits have helped people to make good and healthy and life-giving decisions. We call it discernment, or discernment of spirits. And it makes sense. I mean, why would God not sort of give you that little push, to go in the right direction? And we've all felt that. Like something's not right here. And so it's not just the head, it's we used to say that we say in the Jesuits, trust your heart but use your head too, or trust your head and use your heart too.
Love that. Well, you just released a book, a second volume of thoughts on prayer, and uh, I wrote the title down here. I got to look in my notes. What's in my notes?
That's right. In
In
all
all,
seasons, for
yes, in
all
all seasons for
reasons.
all reasons. Uh, t- Tell me about that book, and I know that you've worked a lot in helping people approach prayer, particularly people who maybe don't spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Yeah, it's a series of essays drawn from a wonderful print and online resource called Give Us This
Yeah.
Day. And what is Give Us This Day? It is a booklet basically that comes out every month. It's online too. I use it every single
Hmm.
day. That has the readings of the day for Catholics for the Mass reading. So the first reading, Psalm, second reading, Gospel reading, reflections on the readings by Scripture scholars, reflections on the lives of the saints and prayers. It's great. And so each month I write a column. I've written a column for like 10, 15 years called Teach Us to Pray. Very short, 250, 300 words, and it's they've been collected into two volumes: In All Seasons for All Reasons, Volume One, Volume Two. And the In All Seasons is for the different liturgical seasons, so Lent, Advent, Christmas, Easter, whatnot, ordinary time. And then the reasons, so like praying when you're depressed, praying when you're frustrated, praying for peace, that kind of stuff. And I try to keep it really simple because I think most people, for most people, prayer has been made so complicated, and it doesn't need to be. So that's what the book is. Volume two just came out a couple months ago.
Tell me about that. For most people, prayer has been made too complicated. What do you mean by that?
I think that I wrote another book called Learning to
Yeah,
Pray,
yeah.
and
It's a
yeah,
great
where I
book.
really kind of laid it out. Thank you. I think that I think that this is for Christians. This is not just for
Yeah.
Catholics or Protestants or evangelicals. I think that many people believe that everyone else has an easier time praying, and that they look around and someone might say, "Oh, my prayer is really important to me." And then you think about that person, oh my gosh, lucky them. All they got to do is close their eyes and they're in communion with God. And, sometimes we do feel like that. But I think for a lot of us, contemplative prayer, and by that I mean just kind of being quiet and being with God, can sometimes be confusing or even frustrating because we don't know what to expect. What's supposed to happen when I close my eyes? Now, I'm not talking about the kind of prayer where it's petitionary prayer and you're vocalizing and it's more speaking to God. I'm talking about the listening to God part. Like what's going on when I pray about this. So what I try to do in my writing is try to, in a sense, I don't want to say demystify it, but just bring it a little bit down to earth and say, these are the kinds of things that happen when you close your eyes and you try to pray. And it's okay if it's dry from time to time. So that's what I'm saying. It can be complicated and off-putting to people because they feel somehow I'm not doing it right. And that's one of the things I try to talk about in the books.
Yeah. What was your experience with that? You say you grew up in a house that was, you went to church, fairly regularly, but, not super religiously. And then, you know, you got into this life in your early adulthood, and then you just dove in. Did you feel like everybody else was more spiritual, had this figured out? Like,
Yeah.
how how did you learn this stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. There was a shock because I grew up going to church, asking for things from God, which is great. God, let me get an A on this test. Let me get a home run in Little League. Let me whatever. I mean, as we all
Yeah.
do, which is fine. Petitionary prayer is fine. The Our Father is a petitionary prayer. Give us this day, right? Forgive us our trespasses. But I never thought that prayer could be any more than that, more than this sort of one-way street, which a friend of mine calls talking at God, which is fine, right? May I have this? Can you help me with this? When I went on my first retreat, the retreat director asked me to think about who Jesus was. And I came back with this list: Messiah, Savior, Son of God. And he said, well, maybe just let your mind wander a bit. And I started to think about Jesus as a friend, imagine myself in the scriptures, imagine myself with Jesus. Nothing mystical or no visions, but just sort of imagining that and feeling really good about it. And he said to me, I think you're starting to pray. You're starting to allow yourself to think about Jesus, to feel Jesus, to imagine yourself with Jesus, to speak to Jesus, to imagine Jesus speaking to you, to put yourself in the gospel scenes. And to be honest, it was a revelation. Uh, but I still had a little ways to go. And of course, we all do. I went into the novitiate the first 2 years, and I would hear my fellow novices say things like, oh, I felt God saying this to me in prayer.
I hear that
And
language
I'm
all
like,
the
what are you
time.
talking
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, what are you talking about? Did you hear a voice? No, it was different. So I really had to learn, and I talk about this in my book, Learning to Pray, what that meant. And it means sometimes in prayer we have images, feelings, desires, emotions, memories, right? All these things come up. Sometimes words and phrases occasionally. And to pay attention to those ways in prayer as ways that God is communicating. Insights are very important, as well as in our daily life. What's going on in our daily life? It's not just when we're closing our eyes and when we're, sitting in our favorite prayer chair. And I had to really be open to that, that this was one way that God could communicate with me and that God wanted to communicate with me. So it's a very fine line. That doesn't mean that everything that happens when you close your eyes is God's voice. And it doesn't mean that God's going to be speaking to you clearly every moment of the day. I mean, I think people who say, "Oh, I'm completely connected with God. I know exactly what God wants." No, I mean, it takes some sort of discernment and to think about this because it can be very subtle.
Yeah.
But it is true that, God wants to communicate with us and we need to be open to that, both in our prayer and in our daily lives. That's how I look at it. So that was the revelation that God would really want to communicate with me. I thought would have been arrogant before, but now I realize God wants to communicate with all of us.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting hearing you talk about this because when I think about Thomas Merton, I think about going out to the desert, or living in
Yeah,
this monastery in the middle of Kentucky, right? Like
right.
getting away from everything and like that's what I picture and you leaving New York City and going away. But now you are in downtown New York City, right? You're in I picture right now you're some hundreds of feet high, I'm imagining, right? Like you're like,
Pretty
how are you
much.
doing this in downtown New York City? How do people do this in the middle of their busy lives, busy days when they can't go out to the woods?
I think there's a couple ways. That's also a very good question. We have an expression in the Jesuits called "we are contemplatives in action."
Mm,
So we have a contemplative stance and a contemplative heart, but we're busy people. And I think most of the people listening to this podcast would be as well. Now, what does that mean? The first thing is it means paying attention to the places in your life where God is speaking to you. So relationships, work, family, friends, whatever, nature, anything, anything. So to be attentive to that, where is God reaching out to me? Where am I encountering God in a relationship, in an encounter, right? In a moment in my day, even something simple like, a good meal that I have, right? That's the first thing. So a kind of contemplative stance. Second of all, would be we do something called the examination of conscience at the end of the day, which is just a base. What does that mean? It means reviewing your day to see where you felt God's presence. And that really can help solidify things. You say, oh, I missed that. So that the next time it happens, the next day, you're like, oh, okay. Um, and I think the third thing is making a conscious effort to carve out time of your day where you aren't crazy and you do have time to spend one on one with God, even if it's in silence. I often say, and this is from a spiritual director called Father Bill Barry, that we can compare our relationship with God to a friendship. So, Andrew, let's say you and I wanted to become friends. What would that require? Well, some time, first of all, and that's the same with God. Some listening, right? So I want to listen to you. What do you think about things? And we listen to God in our prayer and in our daily lives. But also honesty, right? We want to be honest with each other, like as a friend. We want to be honest with God in prayer, but sometimes silence too. Just if we're driving together or walking down the street together, something like that. So all these things I think help us to deepen our relationship with God. But what's the point? The point is time. Like at some point in the day, you do need a little time just to be quiet and spend time with, some spiritual reading or your prayer practices or a devotional that you have. Because otherwise, if I say, imagine if someone said to me, well, are you and Andrew friends? Yes. Well, do you ever spend any time with him? No, I never spend time with him at all, one on one. It was crazy. But we sometimes do that with God. So we need to just carve out a little time. So that's how you do it when you're busy. One is to be aware day to day of what's going on, hour to hour. Second is to maybe take some time at the end of the day. And third is to sort of carve out some contemplative time to just be silent.
that's really great. That's really great. Okay, so I read this conversation that you had. I don't know when it was, but I read it recently. You and Ross Douthat had
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the New York Times columnist, who I always think is
Hmm.
fascinating. um, where you talked about suffering. And I think suffering is, to so many of us, been a sort of a key to finding our way towards God. And
Sure.
a lot of times, these losses that we've talked about with career, relationships, faith, come with quite a bit of suffering. And I'm curious what role suffering has had in your life, in your faith, and how that has shaped you, and how you've seen that shape others, and what place that
Yeah.
has in the faith journey for you.
Well, I think it's important to say that all of us suffer in some way. We've all had physical problems, emotional problems, financial problems, relationships, whatever, right? Psychological problems, anything. Unless you're some young, healthy 10-year
Yeah,
old,
yeah, yeah,
maybe
yeah.
they don't. But I think they suffer too,
Sure.
like bullying and not doing well in school and whatnot. So I think we all suffer. I think one of the things to recognize as you get older is that it is part of life, and it was part of Jesus's life. And I often remind people, not just on the cross, not just in those 3 hours on the cross or during the Passion, but he had, friends misunderstood him, and certainly Joseph would have probably died before Jesus started his public ministry, because he's not in Jesus's public ministry. His foster father, Mary's husband, would have died. Um, so Jesus faced suffering. I think the key is to let it transform you by allowing yourself to find out what God wants you to see in this suffering. I really don't think God sends us suffering to sort of test us or to punish us, God forbid. But I do think suffering is just part of the human condition. And yet we are invited to, with Jesus's help and with God's grace, to try to understand where am I being called to go deeper? What is God trying to teach me in this, right? So it's a balance. I really do not think I don't think this is true. God punishes people. Remember the story of the man born blind, which I'm sure you
Yeah,
know. Who sinned that this man was
yeah,
born blind? Jesus said no one sinned. So we have to move away from that. But the man is born blind, and what can we understand about our suffering in light of knowing that Jesus understands what it means to suffer, which is hugely important. Human and divine, but also that God accompanies us in this suffering. So I think it's something that every believer has to grapple with. And I also think that the invitation for me increasingly is to be in relationship with a God whose ways you don't fully understand. So look, there's so many places, without getting in any way political, there's so many places around the world where there's a great deal of
yeah.
suffering. Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Myanmar. Okay, I'm without getting political. We have to ask ourselves, there are so many people that have been praying for peace in Ukraine for whatever the last 2 or 3 years. Why not? Well, is God deaf to our prayers? I mean, clearly people want it. It's suffering for people over there. And so that's where we have to say, we don't understand. We really don't. We do not understand. I don't think it's a punishment for the Ukrainian people. It's not a punishment for people who have lost loved ones or, cruelly injured. God doesn't work like that. So that's the question. Can you still be in a relationship with a God whose ways you don't understand? I think that's a key question for Christian adults.
Yeah, that's really profound. Well, I'd love to shift gears. You work a lot with artists. You in your work with the magazine, um, and you work a lot with high profile people, right? Like you're sometimes,
Sometimes, not always, but
yeah.
sometimes, yeah.
Um, but it is interesting. Like you have a lot of conversations with people of renown, and I'm curious what you have learned from those experiences. What do you take away? Someone who's made a vow of poverty, and who has friends who are the poorest of the poor, who also has conversations with Martin Scorsese and, you know, the richest of the rich. Um,
Mhm.
what's it like to have those conversations? What's the same? What's different? What have you learned from those?
Yeah, great question. The same is everybody struggles. Everybody has their problems, and being famous some of the people I interviewed and some of the people that I know doesn't solve your problems. In fact, fame can be a real
Yeah.
burden. And I know that sounds like people say, "Oh, I'd love that burden," but
No,
no,
I'm
I mean
sure.
it's they get attacked and they don't feel like they have privacy and everything they do is sort of magnified. But mainly it's that they have the same kind of lives. Like they have physical problems, and that's the great leveler,
Your back
right?
still
Or
hurts.
they get divorced, or they get the flu, or they get, some terrible illness. Uh, and they're all sort of on this search for God. And yeah, it's funny. I've never really thought about this. I don't find any qualitative difference between their searches for God. A lot of them are struggling just as much. And, uh, And I've also known people for whom fame has been really a burden
Yeah.
and kind of toxic. I was good friends with the actor Philip Seymour
Yeah.
Hoffman,
Yeah.
who some people
You
might
guys work
remember.
together quite a lot.
We did, and I think fame was a real burden for him. He was essentially, without breaking confidence, he was kind of essentially a private person, and people would go nuts when they saw him, and I think that was difficult. And he ended up very sadly, dying of a drug overdose. And he's a good friend, and I'm good friends with his wife. And so I think it's a reminder that fame certainly doesn't solve everything, right? It doesn't solve your problems, and in fact, it can sometimes make them worse. He was a really lovely person, by the way. Um, the other thing is like you really can't let the famous people go to your head. You can't do that, particularly as a Jesuit. I mean, that would be awful. And really, I mean, the ones that are like actual friends are very few. Other ones I might know
Sure.
professionally. Yeah.
Sure.
So, and you don't want people to think you're just hanging around with celebrities because I'm not. Um, but I think, I have a podcast called The Spiritual Life, and I think one of the things what we try to do is to show people that to bring them in maybe with the famous person or the famous name, but to show that we're all focused. This is a podcast focused on God,
Yeah.
certainly like yours, focused on Jesus.
Yeah.
And they all have their same
And
struggles,
you have some great conversations. It's really fascinating. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
really
thanks.
fun.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
I will say you did get to be in a Martin Scorsese movie, which is about the coolest thing anybody can ever do. You were in The Irishman, which is
Yeah.
amazing. But you were saying that you got to work on the movie Silence, which Silence is one of my very favorite books
Is
of all
it?
time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Sacco Endo.
I worked with Martin Scorsese on Silence as their kind of theological advisor as a Jesuit. And
Amazing.
I helped Andrew Garfield and more than Adam Driver and worked with them. And I helped Andrew Garfield learn about Jesuit prayer. And yeah, it was pretty wonderful. And then I ended up being invited to have a a part in The Irishman, which was pretty funny because
So cool.
Marty said, "Yeah, well," he said, "How would you feel about playing a priest?" And I said, "Well, I can do that. That's not hard." And so I was in two baptism scenes, the priest and the baptism scene, doing pretty bad Latin from what been told. Um, but I said, "Hey, listen, at least I have a Philly accent. It takes place in Philly." And my joke was to him was, "I'm the only one in the movie with a Philadelphia accent. Everybody sounds like they're from Brooklyn." Which are two distinct accents. But it was a lot of fun. It was really interesting and fun, and he's a wonderful person, and it was fascinating to,
Bet.
it's fascinating. And just, I've been on a movie set a couple times before. It's like a whole new world. But yeah, I don't, that is not my normal way of being. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. And a Scorsese set of that. Well, I'd love
Yeah,
to get
which
to
is
the.
very elaborate.
I can't imagine. And that movie was great. Well, I'd love to get to the new book, which is just sounds amazing. So it's a memoir about your journey. Confessions of a busboy, dishwasher, caddy, usher, factory worker, bank teller, corporate tool, and priest. Please tell me
Right.
about this book.
Yeah, so again, it's called Work in Progress, and I'm super excited about it. It comes out in February. You can pre-order it now. It's on print, audio, and ebook. Yeah, basically, it's the story of, as I say, finding work and finding God. And it's my vocation story told through the lens of these crazy summer jobs I had. And way back in the 70s, everybody had a summer job. And I was, busboy, dishwasher, lawnmower, paper boy, usher, factory worker, waiter, bank teller. And it's fun. It's very lighthearted. But at the end, it gets, a little bit more serious about how I found God. I really enjoyed doing it. It was the book I had the most fun writing. It's the
Really?
one that well, it's just fun. And it's, I've written books on prayer and on Jesus and on Lazarus and on the Jesuit spirituality tradition. And, those were interesting, but, it was more serious. This is
Yeah.
fun. I mean, when I'm telling a story about banging a woman in the head with my busboy tray. I mean, that wasn't fun for her, but it's kind of a crazy story. And, working as a caddy and almost getting struck by lightning and all that kind of stuff. These are more funny stories. So I hope people really enjoy it. And it's written for everybody.
Mm.
It was tons of fun to do. Also, no footnotes. No footnotes.
Yeah, you get to, it's all the references are you and your own brain. Yeah,
That's right.
that's so
Um,
fun.
Yeah, but I
Well,
did do some research. I called friends and interviewed them and talked about things because, you tend to forget stuff that happened 50 years ago.
oh yeah. What made you want to write this book?
Great question. I had been sharing some of these stories with friends who said you should write these down. I started
Mm.
to write these stories down. I'm a big fan of Gene Shepherd, who wrote the famous short stories that A Christmas Story is based on, the famous
Oh,
Christmas
wow.
movie,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You'll
yeah.
Shoot Your Eye Out. And I try to sort of pattern a little bit after what he did, pattern my book a little bit after what he did.
Huh.
But what happened was I started to write these stories down because look, it's 50 years ago and I'm 65 and I may not always remember them. And my publisher said, "This is great, but you can't just write a book of funny summer job stories." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, they're going to want more from you." So it's about work, really. So it's the summer jobs, my work at GE, and then entering the Jesuits. And so that's why it's called Work in Progress. It's about work, but it's also about me, and how we change. And really, it's about life lessons that I learned from my summer jobs and just all jobs. Work hard, be on time, listen to people, support people who are struggling. Don't be a jerk. Don't be mean. Be kind. Apologize. Ask for when you don't know how to do something. Just kind of life lessons. So truly, I had a ton of fun doing it. It was so much fun, and the people who've read it have really enjoyed it. So I'm super excited about it.
Sounds great. Was there anything that surprised you as you wrote this?
Yes, a lot. And by the way, as a musician, I want to say there's also a playlist for the book.
Oh,
Um, be,
absolutely.
well,
Tell me a
here's
couple
what
of the songs.
Afternoon Delight by the Starland Vocal Band.
Yes.
After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. These are all 70s songs. I'll tell you something funny. You'll love this as a musician. I could talk about this forever. So, as you probably know, as a musician, but maybe your listeners don't know, and I didn't know it, if you quote more than two lines from a song, you need to get permission and you need to
That
get the
bit me
rights.
so hard on my book. Yeah, yeah.
And it is a nightmare.
Yes, yes.
And so one would think, so in my first chapter, I talk about it's all the songs that were playing during the summertime of that year. And in 1976, the first chapter was Afternoon Delight by the Starland Vocal Band, which is, I'm sure gonna find my baby, gonna hold her tight, gonna grab some afternoon delight. My motto's always been when it's right, it's right. Why wait until the middle of a cold, dark night? Okay, fine. Four lines, $400
Uh-huh.
for that. Took months. You would think you
Yes.
would go on some website, you'd
Yeah.
fill out a form. No,
700
as you know,
emails. Yeah.
months, months, months. Anyway, one of them, the Neil Young song, After the Gold Rush, which we played a lot in college while we were smoking pot. I will go into that maybe, and I go into that in the book. It took about a year. And
You're
I finally,
kidding.
no, no, and I finally reached out to Neil Young's people himself through the internet, through this, through that. And they were like, we're going to make this happen. And even after they said we're going to make it happen in their best sort of
Yeah.
intentions, it took another 3 months. Anyway, here's the funny part of the story. So I read the audiobook, which took, hours and hours and hours to read. I get to these songs, and you're a musician, you would know this. When you get to the songs, it's kind of hard not to start singing them, gonna find my baby, gonna hold her tight. And they said, you can't sing them.
Because yeah, then you got to pay publishing.
You don't have permission to sing
Yeah.
them. And I said, well, what am I going to just speak them? They're like, yes, you are. So it's crazy. That surprised me. I think the other thing that surprised me was this. I found a journal I kept when I was 15, the whole year, like couple pages a day when I was a 15-year-old boy from 1976. And it was like a gold mine because look, Andrew, you have memories of when you growing up, and they've been probably changed through time and telling the stories over. When you meet your 15-year-old self again, like word for word, it was shocking. So it was shocking just to say what I was thinking and how I thought and the words I used and it really that was part of the research for the book. Can I tell you a funny story though?
Please.
The first chapter is about me being a busboy and a dishwasher at a place called the Ice Cream Inn. And on my last day, I had remembered this as a kind of malicious prank. I was my very last day. They poured cold water over me and threw me into the dumpster, right? Because I'm like this 15-year-old busboy, right? The older busboys and the waiters and all this. And I remembered it as this kind of malicious kind of prank almost. I went back in my journal and it was a funny moment that happened. It happened to everybody. I was expecting it all day. It was funny. We laughed about it. I thought, isn't that interesting? My memory of it was completely different. My memory of it was like of humiliation. In reality, it was this fun thing that happened that I was expecting, and that if it hadn't happened to me, I would have probably felt like left out. So it was good to have this journal to, kind of verify things. That was a bit of the research.
Isn't that wild the way
It is wild. It is wild,
time
and
changes those things for us?
completely. And so
Huh.
that's one of the things that I ended up sort of interviewing friends I worked with, and do you remember this? Do you remember that? And sent it to my friends who I was in high school and college with, just to say, is this accurate? And most of the stuff was, but it was a joy to write and to kind of revisit that time in my life. And one of the points of the book is grace is everywhere, even if you're a 15-year-old busboy, you know?
And that sounds just wonderful. Good for
Thanks.
you. That just sounds like a real treat. Well, I
Thanks.
can't wait to read it, and or maybe I should listen to it. I don't know what sounds more fun.
If you listen to it, don't expect me to be singing those songs. That's for sure.
Well, my last question for you was going to be, what you've written so many books. Which one was your favorite? But I think I know. I think I know the answer.
I think it's this. I think the one I'm proudest of, if I could say that, is my book, Jesus, a Pilgrimage, which is a life of Christ. But the one that I had the most fun with was definitely this. There's no question. I mean, it's just, and I'm glad I got these things down,
Yeah.
before a couple of years, I'll probably forget them. So yeah, it was really, I think all of our childhoods are kind of magical for us. And what I wanted to share with people was not just stories, but to say, like in your life too, I bet you had some magical moments like this, and moments of grace, and moments of real consolation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to see the ways that those shaped you, how that's, led you to being who you are now. And
And how it
yeah.
leads all of us, right?
Yeah.
That's really the point of the book. We're all formed by these, not just summer jobs, but these experiences that have happened that seem at the time to be incidental or not important or an annoyance, but are actually really ways that God has of, being with us.
Yeah. It's beautiful, man.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for being with me today. This was a real treat.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. Thanks for all the good work you do. And, if you want me to come back on after you've read it, I'm happy to do that too.
Man, that would be a lot of fun. Thank you so
All right.
much. Take care.
Andrew, God bless. Take
You
care.
too. We obviously recorded that interview a few months ago, and I actually just watched him on Colbert like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was so cool to be like, oh my gosh, he's sitting there talking to Stephen Colbert. And I had like an hour-long conversation with him, and we actually texted for a few weeks afterwards, and about a couple things, which was really sweet. What a kind, wonderful man. And I hope to have him back on because I have read a lot of the book, Work in Progress, and it's really great. Okay, I told you that I have some updates, and I do. The first of which is that the podcast here is going to bi-weekly. We're going to do these every 2 weeks because I have other things I'd like to do with my life, and frankly, I think I can do a better job at this podcast if we do it every 2 weeks and I can have the chance to take a breath. I've been trying to crank them out, and I'd rather do this well and sleep and, This is not my full-time job, but I love doing it, and I don't want to stop. And I think I'm going to burn out if I don't pace myself. So we're going to do this every 2 weeks, and we're going to keep doing it. And oh my goodness, there's so many more great episodes to come. So keep your eyes peeled every 2 weeks, every Tuesday. So many more great episodes. We got Kurt Thompson coming up, N.T. Wright, Jason Gray, and so many more great episodes in the next couple months, and so many more to come. It's wild. So excited. My next update is that I released a Substack post a few days ago talking about the project that I'm working on, and I'd love for you to go check that out. So I often say here, go check out my Substack, and I always would love you to. That's where you can find me, get in touch, support the podcast, lots of things, and that's true. But I'd love for you to go check out this Substack post. I get to talk kind of at length about the new project that I'm working on, which I'm going to be spending really the rest of this year and most of next year working on, which is a series of prayer books, taking sort of the framework of the Book of Common Prayer and simplifying it and making it something that's really, really easy to use, that's in modern language, that's in really handy forms for people like me who would love to use it in our daily lives. But frankly, it requires too many bookmarks and calendars and the ability to read Old English and a thesaurus and all this other knowledge besides the ability to just pick up the book and get in touch with God, which is what I want to do. And sometimes there are all these barriers, which were not supposed to be there, right? Because the Book of Common Prayer, which was created 400 or 500 years ago, was actually a way for the common person, a regular person, to be able to get in touch with God. And this was something that was made for a common person. But now it's so old that what is modern then is really hard for us to use now. And so I'm not the first person to do something like this. There are like thousands of things like this. But the way that I need it, and that I think a lot of other people might need it, doesn't really exist in a form that I can find. And so I keep reaching for a book that doesn't exist. And I finally came to the conclusion that maybe that means I need to make something. And so I talk about this more on the Substack. I'd love for you to go find it there because I'm going to share my progress. I honestly might need a lot of feedback, give people a chance to kind of touch it and feel it early, and make sure that what works for me works for more people, so that it's really a useful tool that can serve a lot of people. And so I would love for people who are engaging with this podcast to be able to help out and be a part of that project early. It's called The Quiet Hours. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And so anyway, I'd love for you to go check that out. It's not something I'm going to sort of blast on social media. I'm going to kind of keep it on my Substack, but I will maybe mention it occasionally here on the podcast. But I think it'll be a fun thing to have in our little corner of the internet. So I wanted to share that here. All right, we'll be back in 2 weeks with another great episode. Oh, if I can ask, please, if you like this podcast, go like it on something. Give it 5 stars somewhere. That's super, super helpful for people to find it. Also, if you like my book, go on Amazon and do the same thing. Thank you. All right. Sorry, have to ask. You guys are amazing, and it is such a joy and honor to do this with you and for you. Have a wonderful day. And now, go do something awesome.